So the next thing I want to do is to have that sort of swing around. Vector 2. No, let's just use float, angle, yield return null. Yield return null. Angle plus equal 0.1. I add a sub-thread like so. Okay, Port Raw, have a good night, mate. Thanks for tuning in. Okay, yes, it goes the wrong way round, so it becomes... Try to get the coordinates to match up between the two. Right, they're at 90 degrees to each other, so if I can just sit there and do minus. Hey, not side. Yeah, math. And I'm using angles. I forgot when I said never use angles, that there is, when you're doing graphics like this, that's the one time you use angles. Because they you hardly ever really need to use them, and there are problems of inaccuracy, there are problems of speed, performance, there are problems with subtracting and adding angles together when they wrap around. Use Euler angles, you'll get gimbal lock. It's like just that. Not a good idea. It's looking good. When I Oh. I don't. No, well, both. The alternative is to use linear algebra, which most of the time is what you want. I mean, as an example, right? I remember once when it's a true story. When I worked in a company in America, there was a programmer. He was working on the ball physics, and the guy who was in charge there, they was one of these advocates of the waterfall process, and he wanted everything documented before it was coded. I mean, thinking back on it, these people were in fact insane. But anyway, the point here is that it's not true. They weren't insane. It's just that it was shocking exactly how bad it was when I first encountered corporate video game programming. So look, and I kid you not, the programmer who was working on this was using sine and cosine in the ball mathematics code. It wasn't the first time I'd seen it. There was someone, when I was working on Kickoff, one of the people who was working on another platform was talking about, or he did the ball in the same way. Basically, one of the things that you get is an obsession with sine and cosine, because people think in terms of polar coordinates instead of thinking in terms of rectangular coordinates. And so you think if you're moving, an object is moving in a certain direction, they like to think of a heading and a speed. But it turns out that if you try and do all of your mathematics with angles and distances, it's a nightmare. It makes things really complicated, really brittle. Linear algebra is just vector maths. So I threw out the whole of the library of the ball code at this company and was able to replace it with about 10 lines, going back to what I used to do. It was quite educational because I had to have confidence in what I was doing in spite of the arguments I had. There was another guy I worked at company. I was trying to implement what is in effect the pimpl pattern, the pimpl idiom, to separate the game code from his engine code. Oh, the arguments about that, because I wanted to use a void pointer. In C, if you want to avoid problems with data being held in classes that is platform specific, you can just use an opaque pointer or a void pointer, and the implementation knows how to cast it, but it gets passed around in a structure, and those who are using the structure, they don't they can't access it because it's just a pointer to they don't know what. pimpl Idiom was using that in 1997 in C. Arguing with the guy who was the tech lead. It's like, I don't know when the pimpl Idiom was invented. I'm reminiscing on my... The pimpl Idiom. Yes, the first PlayStation 1 game I worked on was a football game. I'll just point out that just about everybody involved in that game, no one has ever heard of since. The company doesn't exist anymore. The people who ran the company doesn't exist anymore. Well, they don't seem to be doing anything. I just want to point out that I'm still here. This is it's 20 years ago, flipping heck. The pimpl Idiom, also known as the compilation firewall or Cheshire Cat technique, is a private implementation technique useful only in C++ and statically compiled languages like it. Let me be more specific. It is only useful in languages that have header files. Even that they can't get right. Oh, I'm an arrogant SOB. Changing private member variables of a class does not require recompiling classes that depend on it, thus make times are faster and the fragile binary interface problem is reduced. What's the fragile binary interface problem? Developer A writes a base class intending it to be derived from. Developer B uses a library from A containing said class and writes and uses a derived class. Developer A delivers to B a newer version of the base class which is supposedly backwards compatible. Developer installs the library from A, relinks his application, it crashes and burns in mysterious ways. Yes, we all know this one. The header file does not need to include classes that are used by value in private member variables, thus compile times are faster. It's sort of like the way Smalltalk automatically handles classes. Drawback, small work for implementer. Nah. Doesn't work for protected members where access by subclasses is required. Meh. Somewhat harder to read code. Meh. Runtime performance is slightly compromised. Yeah, hardly measure it. It seems to me like the need for something like this reflects a less than ideal design decision in C++ language, namely that it's object-orientated. The need to declare private members as part of the declaration that the rest of the system compiles against. But the point is, it only matters because of header files. But anyway, I wanted to know the origin. I don't know. pimpl Idiom first used there's no information about how widespread it was. Anyway, Oh, there's someone's asking Dino. Oh, better take a look then. Starting XP asks, Dino, starting in game dev, not for a living, would you advise to work on A, single game and keep improving it, i.e. game as a service, or make many lower quality games and release them quickly? The answer is neither. What you want to do is take option C. Make many small scope games, release them quickly, and make them as high quality as you can. Because you see, the bias that you have there is that you assume that because a game is small, it's less quality. Quality is not very easy to change. It's not easy to measure. It's not easy to guide. Or it's not. The only thing I know about quality is that if you have a good process, then that will lead to good quality. That's all I know. There is nothing else about it. Scope, on the other hand, is another thing. So you can have a game that's very high quality, but very small scope. For example, Tetris is a high quality game, but it's small scope. It's one of the most successful games ever made. So I would put it like that. And it's better to ship a lot of stuff. And that's how I started. There's my most productive period in terms of games over a period of time was with the original Acorn Atom, and in the Acorn Atom Magic Book I made 5, 6, 7 games over a short period of time. They're all small games, but they're all complete, and that's really, really important. They're finished. They work. They're identifiable as games. And that is really, really important. Especially when you're starting out. The other thing is that the more games that you make, the greater the probability that eventually you get something that's really catches on. Yeah, scope, exactly. You always did use the word scope and don't use the word quality, because people do that all the time. It's really weird. They confuse the two, even without thinking about it. Your menu looks odd because it extends out before moving part even gets to the center. Well, if you look at it, it's because it's making the nearest one pop out. It's sort of rounding it to the nearest. What is an opaque pointer in C++ and C? You get this problem. I mean, even in C, I'll just do it in C for a change, right? say you have that. This is an API for stuff. And so inside the structure, we need this big class, which is needed for stuff to work. And we have it's a pointer to it. So then, of course, this won't compile. So what you do is you have to define it. But this thing and so you need to include that. And so on and so on. So of course you might include this with a header. Because this thing continues in a chain and blah blah blah, right? But then one day you say, this is ridiculous. Every time we want to have a foo, we need to include the entire tree of header files, and making any modification to any header file requires a recompilation of the entire project. And I'm sick and tired of that, you say. So what you do is you say, away with you. Instead, we'll use a forward declaration. Bit rusty on C, but... Well, what? Well, it means that the code that's accessing your library... Okay, well, this is C. You can't C++, you can't do this in C. In fact, but you know, if you're in C++, this becomes an opaque pointer or a pimpl or whatever, because the point here is I'm allowed to have a pointer to it even though it's not defined, and thus it creates, that's another they called it a compilation firewall. It basically means I don't have to compile 100,000 header files just because I want to add two vectors together. Thank you very fracking much. Which is where you go if you don't have a header file discipline. In C, you can't do this. I don't think. I don't know. Maybe you can in some standards, but there is. You can do this. Create a void pointer. So now with a void pointer, definitely nothing can, you know, access it. Anything that uses foo here is fine, but you can have some data here, which is fine. Then in the implementation, how does it work? Well, you know, you take your foo, and you there you go, you do foo, you don't sound like foo. I'll call this pimpl. So pimpl. I can't access that. Well, you can if you cast it. Fancy implementation. So now I take my void pointer and I cast it to a pointer to my implementation. And then I can access haha. Now you see, haha is stored inside the pimpl, but the implementation can access it, but anything in that's using your library can't. It's a very elegant way of getting rid of the problem of header file explosion, because when your header file explodes, all kinds of bad things happen. You get fragility when modifications to the headers are made, causes your whole project to stop compiling, or huge compile times. I mean, you just need to look at that, you know. I could probably look it up. It's like, I think I talked to you about this the other day. How many lines of code included by Windows.h? It's crazy, it doesn't even say. Drawing a line using GDI Plus. I will use this to show you an example of the hell that can arise when you let a hacker design architecture. Hacker in this case was Bill Gates. Include stdafx. What is that? That's the pre-compiled header. Hash include windows.h. Windows.h is a Windows-specific header file. Look, there are a number of child header files that are automatically included with Windows.h. It includes exec.h, standard.h, windef.h, winnt.h, base.std.h, guide type, string, winbase, winerror, wingdi, winuser, winNLS, wincon, winver, winreg, winnetwork. Extra includes cdr, blah blah blah. Oh, by the way, each one of these also includes other header files, and so we're going to have a huge thing, and then there's a huge thing here and another thing here, and you're drawing a line. You're drawing a fracking line, and you've probably included 200,000 lines of code to draw a fracking line. What a nightmare, huh? I think so. There we are. So you can stop that nightmare by using a pimpl. Pity Bill Gates didn't know the concept of the pimpl. The world would have turned out very differently. I'm not a fan. So what have we got here? We have this, and I don't know, what was I going to do next? Yes, I know, it does, doesn't it? So complex just to draw a line. This is Bill Gates' work. All right, I think this is working, and I think this is as good as, this is all I'm going to do tonight. I think we'll call it a night there, because I'm run out of steam now. So remember to pimpl your code. Ha. Good night, Sensei. As long as it's Sensei, not Sensei. I'll let XP explain that one to you. Take care, everybody. Have a good night. I'll be back again tomorrow. Hal, play Man with a Mission.
I'm a man with a mission.
Good night now. He's a man with a mission.
I'm a man with a mission.
With a mission. Intermission. With a mission.
I'm a man with a mission. I'm a man with a mission. I'm a man with a mission. I'm a man with a mission. I'm a man with a mission. I'm a man with a mission. I'm a man with a mission.
You're raising suspicion with your condition.
with a mission. I'm a man with a mission. I'm a man with a mission.